America has built a lot of things: highways, rockets, empires, and 49 of the dumbest inventions you've never heard of. Some exploded on contact. Others just quietly humiliated everyone involved. From rocket-powered recliners to fish strollers and lie-detecting sweatbands, these were real, manufactured, and briefly trusted. They were born in boardrooms, sold with straight faces, and buried in the junk drawer of history. Why? Because innovation doesn't always ask if it should, only if it can. So buckle up. This is 2 hours of pure, unfiltered nonsense, built in the land of the free. The Anti-Bandit Bag, 1960s. In the golden age of paranoia and purse snatchers, someone had the bright idea to weaponize a handbag. Enter the anti-bandit bag, an invention birthed in the 1960s from a time when people thought the solution to crime wasn't police work or urban planning, but explosive zippers. The concept? Simple. If a thief tried to yank your purse away, the strap would trigger a spring-loaded mechanism that blasted the bag's contents, lipstick, loose change, and private letters, into the street like an emotional confetti bomb. The inventor called it a deterrent. Victims called it a public mess. And thieves? They called it a game. Because while you stood screaming at the chaos, they just scooped up your wallet from the pavement and jogged away, now with bonus pocket lint and a commemorative photo of your dog. As a crime prevention tool, it had the tactical elegance of handing your attacker your belongings in 50 separate pieces. Worse still, it quickly became the ultimate social equalizer, humiliating for everyone. Old ladies scattered sewing needles across crosswalks. Businessmen lost their receipts to the wind. Tourists wept openly over exploded film rolls and stolen passports. The anti-bandit bag didn't reduce theft. It just made it more cinematic. Of course, no one thought to test it in real-life scenarios involving rain, toddlers, or wind tunnels. It took about 6 lawsuits and one incident involving a startled pigeon before cities quietly encouraged everyone to go back to normal purses, the kind that were robbed silently, with dignity. But this was just the beginning. America's obsession with solving normal problems in the dumbest possible ways was only revving up, because just a few years later, someone looked at a wet cigarette and thought, you know what this needs? 2. The cigarette umbrella. 1954. You could call it a public health disaster wearing a trench coat, but in 1954 the real threat to smokers wasn't lung disease, it was rain. And in response to this soggy injustice, one inventor crafted the world's smallest act of defiance, a cigarette umbrella. A tiny translucent shield that clipped directly to your cigarette, ensuring that while your lungs drowned in tar, your filter stayed delightfully dry. It was marketed as the modern smoker's solution to inclement weather, which is a fancy way of saying it made you look like your cigarette had a parasitic attachment. The umbrella worked in theory, assuming there was no wind, no movement, no humidity, and no sudden existential awareness of what your life had become. Cigarette umbrellas didn't catch on for a very simple reason. They didn't work. People fumbled with the clip, stabbed themselves in the lip, or lost them immediately after coughing. And worst of all, they introduced a new era of smug smoking accessories. Suddenly, it wasn't enough to kill yourself with class. You had to accessorize while doing it. But here's the thing. It sold. Briefly. Mostly to men in fedoras who considered weather an affront to their masculinity. And for a moment, somewhere between Eisenhower and Elvis, America flirted with the idea that puffing beneath a canopy of plastic was the height of sophistication. Then the rain came, and the umbrellas flipped, and the smokers got wet, and society quietly agreed to forget the whole thing. But what if weather wasn't the issue? What if your hands were the problem? In 2010, a new wave of tech-addicted human beings finally asked the question no one needed answered: why use your fingers when you can use your face? 3 Nose Stylus for Touchscreens, 2010. At some point in the touchscreen era, someone, probably while wearing mittens, decided that using your hands was too convenient. The solution? The nose stylus. A sleek little pointer that strapped around your head, protruded from your forehead, and drooped downward like a shameful unicorn horn, allowing you to tap your phone with your nose while keeping your hands free for whatever humanity was doing in 2010. Probably tweeting about quinoa. This wasn't a gag gift. It was a genuine product sold to genuine people with genuine faces. It claimed to be perfect for cooking, commuting, or using your phone in the cold. What it really did was make you look like a cybernetic anteater trying to check your bank balance. The stylus worked about as well as you'd expect. Calibration was a nightmare. You'd aim for a message and accidentally open your camera, nose first. Typing became a test of patience and neck control. One user described the experience as like being pecked to death by your own shame. But it tapped into something deeper. A strange, quiet desperation to optimize every second, every finger, every facial muscle. Even if it meant looking like a half-baked cyborg who lost a bet with a Roomba. By 2011, the nose stylus was quietly discontinued. Not because it didn't work, but because no one could be photographed wearing it without reevaluating their entire life. It joined the great scrapyard of tech gimmicks, right next to USB pet rocks and smart salt shakers. But if the nose wasn't sacred, what about the neck? Because decades earlier, someone had already solved the burden of holding up your own head with a device that turned fatigue into theater. 4. Portable chin rest, 1932. Long before ergonomic chairs and overpriced posture apps, someone in 1932 thought the real solution to human exhaustion was a cane. But not just any cane. A cane with a forked top designed to hold up your head like a sleepy scarecrow. This was the portable chin rest, an invention so utterly literal that it bypassed all medical understanding of fatigue and landed squarely in the realm of slapstick dignity support. Marketed to students, scholars, and anyone who dared to read for more than 12 minutes without collapsing, the chin rest was meant to be discreet. It wasn't. Early adopters looked like failed marionettes in library reading rooms, quietly propped up by a stick of shame while pretending their necks weren't giving out. It didn't take long for things to get awkward. People fell asleep standing up. A man at the New York Public Library reportedly sneezed and knocked over an entire shelf while his chin stayed perfectly supported. Technically, it did what it promised. It held up your head. But it did so with the emotional grace of a toddler propping their sibling with a broomstick. The moment you moved, to drink water, turn a page, or react to your impending existential dread, the chin rest would either jab you in the throat or collapse like a broken lawn chair. Of course, it was banned, not by regulation but by collective social embarrassment. Schools, libraries, and churches all agreed, if you're tired, go home. Don't erect scaffolding under your jaw like a sleep-deprived Renaissance painting. Still, the idea of mechanizing mealtime laziness was already stirring in the background, because someone, somewhere, was staring at a spaghetti fork and wondering, why do I have to do the twirling? 5. Self-turning spaghetti fork, 1969. In the year humans landed on the moon, one inventor chose to focus on something far more important: noodles, specifically the act of twirling them. Thus arrived the self-turning spaghetti fork, a battery-powered utensil that spun automatically to wrap spaghetti around its tines because clearly the human wrist had been overworked for too long. It buzzed, it whirred, it vibrated like a novelty toothbrush in a dinner suit. Early models were heralded as breakthroughs in lazy innovation, a marvel for those who considered fork twirling to be emotionally taxing or physically beneath them. But in practice, the fork had the precision of a drunk carousel. It flung sauce. It sent noodles airborne. It turned dinner into a Jackson Pollock painting. Children loved it. Adults pretended to. No one used it twice. The real failure, though, was in control. There was no speed adjustment, no pause function. Once it started, it committed, much like a toddler spinning in a swivel chair. The fork spun too fast, too wildly, and often turned your pasta into a projectile. One reviewer reportedly took a meatball to the eye and simply wrote, "Never again." But beyond the flying noodles and sauce-stained ceilings, the fork represented something deeper, a fear of stillness, a rejection of the idea that eating should require any effort at all. It was a dining experience powered by battery and denial. Eventually, it was relegated to the same drawer as electric knives and novelty wine chillers. The drawer of things purchased in a moment of weakness and never spoken of again. Yet, in the growing war against effort, America wasn't done. Because there was still the question of whether, and whether we could invent something to keep rain off your face while still indulging in your sweet, sweet nicotine. 6. The Rainy Day Cigarette Hat, 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s, when hats still mattered, smoking was basically a personality, and public decency laws had not yet caught up with fashion-based engineering. Into this cultural soup came the rainy day cigarette hat, a wide, rigid plastic dome with a built-in periscope designed so smokers could puff in the rain without getting their faces wet, because umbrellas were for the weak, and hands occupied. It was a marvel of form over function. The hat created a sealed canopy around your head, redirecting cigarette smoke through a small tube so you could keep puffing like a train conductor inside a salad bowl. The periscope didn't help you see. It was just there, adding a militarized aesthetic to an already deranged silhouette. The problem was airflow, or rather, the lack of it. Smokers quickly found themselves hotboxing their own heads. The smell lingered. The hat fogged. One early user described it as, like living inside a coffee-stained ashtray. Romance was dead. Visibility, too. But the marketing didn't stop. Brochures featured smiling, well-dressed men enjoying their cigarette freedom under artificial rain showers, completely ignoring the fact that condensation and claustrophobia had teamed up to create a new kind of personal hell. The device, unsurprisingly, never made it past novelty status. Still, it revealed something poignant, or tragic, depending on your tolerance for irony. Americans would rather engineer a plastic dome for their heads than simply go inside. Comfort, in this case, meant isolation. Individual pleasure wrapped in vapor, plastic, and denial. But if the rainy day smoker was laughable, what came next was downright dystopian. A face-covering contraption designed not to keep you dry, but to help you survive winter looking like a rejected supervillain prototype. 7. The Face Protector for Snowstorms, 1939. The year was 1939. The world teetered on the edge of war, but in certain corners of America, the real enemy was wind chill. Enter the Face Protector for Snowstorms. A transparent plastic cone designed to wrap around your head like a budget astronaut helmet. It was part snow gear, part science fiction cosplay, and entirely committed to the belief that the human face deserved its own weatherproof dome. The logic wasn't wrong. Winter winds are brutal. Snow slaps hurt. But the solution looked like something repurposed from a poultry processing plant. The cone slipped over your head, tightening around the neck with a strap that presumably cut off both airflow and dignity. Inside, your breath fogged the plastic. Outside, you looked like an extra from a retro-futurist PSA about radiation drills. The idea was simple. Block wind, keep your face warm. The execution, however, blocked vision, muffled sound, and gave the distinct impression that you were being punished for crimes unknown. Walking while wearing it was a gamble. Running was basically survival roulette. Parents tried to make kids wear them. Kids refused. Schools banned them not out of safety concerns, but because hallway collisions had skyrocketed. Visibility inside the dome was so poor that wearers developed a slow, methodical gait, the kind reserved for haunted dolls and sleepwalkers. Even friendly eye contact became impossible. You couldn't tell if someone was smiling or plotting. Despite the marketing push, which included phrases like snow shield innovation and storm-proof serenity, The public remained unconvinced. Eventually, the product was discontinued, and the remaining stock was likely converted into salad bowls or nightmare fuel. But the spirit of unnecessary convenience would not be snowed in. Just a few decades later, another cold weather crisis would give birth to a new kind of hands-free absurdity, one that spun, dripped, and delivered sweet frozen laziness by the cone. 8. Motorized ice cream cone, 1999. It was 1999. The internet was still dial-up. Y2K paranoia was peaking, and American inventors were hard at work solving problems that didn't exist. One such breakthrough was the motorized ice cream cone, a handheld device that slowly rotated your frozen treat for you. That's right, no need to move your tongue or rotate your wrist. Just hold your head still and let the battery-powered cone do the work. It was marketed to children and busy parents, which is odd because if you're too busy to lick ice cream, you probably shouldn't be eating it in the first place. The cone came in cheerful colors, featured a simple on-off switch, and spun at a hypnotically slow speed, like a lazy merry-go-round for dessert. But here's the thing about spinning ice cream. It melts, quickly and unevenly, and when it does, centrifugal force becomes your enemy. Users reported getting hit with arcs of melted ice cream flung in all directions. One unlucky dad described the experience as a dairy sprinkler going rogue. Cleanup was included, just not in the box. Functionally, the cone was underwhelming. It required batteries, often double A's, and those batteries died halfway through your scoop. And if they didn't, the motor would sometimes speed up, turning a gentle swirl into a full-on dairy tornado. Vanilla in your eyebrows, sprinkles in your soul. And yet, in its own weird way, it made sense. In the same way padded toilet seats and self-rocking baby cradles do. The American appetite for comfort had collided with the American allergy to effort. Why lick when you can outsource it? But we hadn't hit peak absurdity yet. Because somewhere, in a dimly lit novelty gift shop, someone thought to combine two sacred American pastimes, bathroom breaks and golf, into a single, unforgettable invention. Chapter 9. The Toilet Golf Set, 2005. There are moments when innovation brushes up against absurdity and decides not only to cross the line, but to take a swing at it. The Toilet Golf Set, launched in 2005, was exactly what it sounds like. A miniature putting green that wrapped around the base of your toilet, complete with a plastic putter and golf balls. Because apparently, bathroom time wasn't relaxing enough without the added thrill of competition. It came in a box labeled as the perfect gift for the man who has everything, which is always code for he's impossible to shop for and probably owns a singing fish. Inside, you'd find a green felt mat, a cup with a tiny flag, and just enough self-loathing to carry you through the holidays. The pitch was simple. Practice your short game while doing your business. The reality was more complex. For starters, balance became an issue. Users reported tipping sideways mid-putt, with one reviewer describing the experience as like trying to golf during an earthquake. Others complained that the putter was too short or too long, or just the wrong kind of metaphor for what they were trying to achieve in the first place. The toilet golf set wasn't just useless. It was intrusive. It turned a moment of privacy into a miniature sports arena. Kids thought it was a toy. Pets treated it like a new litter box. And in shared households, it triggered debates over hygiene that led to actual relationships ending in court. Workplaces briefly toyed with installing them in executive bathrooms. That experiment ended quickly, mostly because HR got involved after an intern walked in on the regional manager shouting, "4!" from behind a locked stall. In the end, it wasn't the pudding that doomed it. It was the realization that multitasking has limits, and some zones should remain sacred. Still, if ridiculous facial accessories, airborne food, and bathroom sports weren't enough, America wasn't done tinkering with your appearance, because next came a device designed to force your face into cuteness. one painful pinch at a time. 10. The Dimple Maker, 1936. There's a fine line between beauty innovation and medieval torture device. And in 1936, that line was decisively crossed by the Dimple Maker. This was a metal face clamp that promised to do for dimples what corsets did for waistlines: crush, mold, and permanently reshape your body in the name of fleeting approval. The logic was as simple as it was deranged. Place the clamp on your cheeks, tighten, wait, smile through the pain. Repeat daily until dimples magically appeared or your cheekbones gave up entirely. The device featured two curved metal prongs connected by a screw, pressing into your flesh like a pair of vice grips designed by someone who once saw a cherub and took it personally. It was marketed as painless. Users disagreed. Early reviews read like medical horror stories: bruising, numbness, muscle spasms. One woman reported that her dimples were actually mild indentations from swelling, while another described hers as permanent scarring shaped like optimism. The manufacturers assured the public that this was normal. It wasn't. Despite everything, the Dimple Maker briefly sold well, riding a wave of beauty obsessions and old Hollywood glamour. Everyone wanted to look like Shirley Temple or Clark Gable. And if it meant turning your face into a pressurized science experiment, so be it. Eventually, reality and dermatologists intervened. Doctors warned of nerve damage, lawsuits trickled in, and a growing sense of public embarrassment pushed the Dimple Maker off shelves and into the category of things your grandmother won't talk about but definitely tried. But while that particular clamp faded into obscurity, America's appetite for facial gadgets was just getting warmed up. Because a few decades later, inventors decided that if you could pin your cheeks into cuteness, maybe you could also trick your brain into using your nose as a stylus. Or, worse, your furniture as a tool of psychological warfare. 11. The Horse Gas Mask, 1916. World War I was a breeding ground for invention. Some of it heroic, some of it deeply confusing. Case in point, the horse gas mask. Developed in 1916, it was exactly what it sounds like: a cloth and leather contraption strapped over a horse's entire head, designed to protect it from the new and horrifying invention of chemical warfare. It made sense, at least on paper. Horses were still critical to war, carrying supplies, pulling cannons, even charging into battle. And with mustard gas in the mix, their survival suddenly seemed tactical. But there was a slight flaw. Horses don't like having their faces sealed inside canvas bags, especially not while being shelled. The early masks looked like something out of a steampunk fever dream. Long tubes for ventilation, leather straps wrapped tight, sometimes with metal fittings. In theory, they allowed horses to breathe filtered air. In practice, they caused panic, overheating, and, in one infamous case, a cavalry unit losing half its horses when the animals tore off their masks mid-charge and bolted into a forest. The Army's response? More straps. The real tragedy was that the horses, already terrified by noise, fire, and terrain, now had to deal with what amounted to a sensory deprivation hood. Some refused to move. Others lay down and refused to get back up. One unit reportedly repurposed the masks as saddle padding, claiming they were more useful underfoot. After the war, the horse gas mask became a kind of morbid footnote, a relic of well-intentioned desperation. It reappeared in a few parades and propaganda photos but was quietly phased out when mechanized vehicles took over and someone realized horses, unlike tanks, can't be sealed like soup cans. Still, the idea stuck. If you could deliver destruction from the sky, maybe you could also deliver mail. In a rocket. Because America never met a delivery system it didn't want to militarize. 12. The Rocket Mail Service, 1959. In 1959, the U.S. Postal Service briefly flirted with the future and aimed it directly at the sky. The rocket mail service was exactly what it promised: letters launched by missile. The idea was to bypass trucks, planes, and traffic with good old-fashioned ballistics. Nothing says priority delivery like 3,000 pounds of chemical thrust and an envelope full of coupons. The test launch took place off the coast of Florida. A Navy submarine fired a Regulus Y missile packed with 3,000 letters, which arced across the sky and crash-landed, gracefully, if you believe the press releases, in a designated zone. The mail survived. Technically, most of it was readable. Some was scorched. One letter reportedly arrived with the phrase airmail melted into the envelope like a branding iron. President Eisenhower praised it as a milestone. The Pentagon, however, had concerns, mainly because once you demonstrate the ability to fire explosive-laden mail across state lines, it stops looking like delivery and starts looking like a threat. The Soviet Union noticed. So did the press. Postal officials insisted it was purely peaceful. The military nodded politely and never allowed another launch. The entire program was scrapped after a single demonstration. But for one brief, glorious moment, the future looked like airmail on steroids: fast, loud, and terrifying. It captured the American imagination the way only Cold War stunts could, equal parts absurd and ambitious. And yet, it raised a critical question. If we could fire mail from submarines, could we also fly to work, not in planes, not in cars, but on a one-person flying platform, powered entirely by your ability to not fall off? 13. The Flying Platform, 1955. In the post-war boom of 1955, America was drunk on the dream of personal flight. Jetpacks were just around the corner. Hover cars were promised by every comic book. And in the middle of this airborne fever, someone invented the flying platform. A single-person hovercraft you could steer by shifting your body weight, like surfing atop a leaf blower strapped to a dinner plate. Designed by engineers with more imagination than caution, the flying platform consisted of twin propellers and a flat, circular base, topped with a platform where the pilot stood, fully exposed, with no seat, no harness, and very little common sense. The entire control system? Your balance. That was it. Lean forward to go forward. Lean too far? Congratulations. You're now an airborne yard sale. Early test flights were predictably erratic. Pilots shot into hedges. One flew directly into a military tent. Another grazed a flagpole at 12 miles an hour and landed in a fountain. Stability was a myth. Safety features were non-existent. It was a miracle no one got hurt. Or maybe they did, and the paperwork just got lost in the whirlwind of federal optimism. Still, it flew. Sort of. Briefly. Over flat ground, at low altitudes. And only if the pilot was part gymnast, part bird, part insurance liability. Military brass watched early demonstrations with a mixture of awe and quiet panic. By the third crash, they were already taking notes on how to quietly retire the project. Despite its failure, the flying platform became a symbol, not of flight, but of how far people will go to avoid walking. It lives on in grainy footage and retro sci-fi montages, always hovering just long enough to remind you, sometimes gravity wins. But if standing on a flying disc felt sketchy, imagine riding inside a giant motorized wheel, with no seatbelt, no brakes, and no understanding of what direction was forward. Welcome to the monowheel. 14. The monowheel, 1932. Of all the transportation fever dreams that emerged in the early 20th century, few were as visually absurd or physically disorienting as the monowheel. Picture a single enormous wheel. Now picture a person sitting inside that wheel, surrounded by whirring gears, a gas engine, and absolutely no safety railings. The monowheel was the vehicular equivalent of a hamster ball powered by existential crisis. First built in 1932, this oddity promised to revolutionize transportation by eliminating the need for multiple tires, steering columns, or any practical understanding of physics. The rider sat in a small inner frame, which rotated separately from the outer wheel. Theoretically, the design allowed the wheel to roll while the pilot stayed relatively upright inside. A concept that makes perfect sense until you remember friction, gravity, and the human desire not to barf while commuting. Early models were heavy, loud, and nearly impossible to control. Turning required delicate shifts in body weight, like steering a canoe full of dynamite. Braking was an exercise in pure guesswork. There were no handlebars, no foot pedals, just you, the wheel, and your will to survive. Spectators loved it. Crowds gathered to watch test runs mostly because they knew there was a 50-50 chance someone would flip over and slide into a hedge. Pilots often had to be helped out, dizzy and nauseated after even short trips. The monowheel never caught on, but it refused to die. Every few decades, a new inventor revives it, slaps on an electric motor, adds some lights, and claims it's the future of urban commuting. It's not. It never will be. It's a spectacle, a circle of doom, a reminder that just because something moves doesn't mean it's transportation. Still, the monowheel's real crime wasn't its instability. It was the belief that safety could be engineered as an afterthought. A mistake repeated just a few years later, when someone thought attaching a human scoop to the front of a car would make pedestrians safer. 15. The pedestrian safety net, 1927. There are solutions, and then there are public relations strategies dressed up as hardware. The pedestrian safety net of 1927 was very much the latter. As cities filled with cars and streets became Darwinian, the rising number of pedestrian injuries started to concern automakers. Not enough to slow down, of course, but enough to pretend they cared. So someone, almost certainly a committee, designed a scoop. Literally. A giant padded scoop affixed to the front of a car shaped like a gentle cowcatcher. The idea was noble, in a wildly impractical way. If a pedestrian stepped in front of your vehicle, the scoop would catch them and cradle them like a bewildered baby deer instead of flinging them across the pavement. In promotional materials, the safety net was portrayed as a marvel of compassion. Artists sketched smiling pedestrians gently deposited into fluffy mesh baskets. But in reality, it was a folding wire frame with a tension trigger, the kind of thing more likely to confuse drivers than save lives. It deployed only if the car was moving at the exact right speed, the pedestrian was hit dead center, and the laws of physics decided to take the afternoon off. If you were even slightly off angle, the scoop either failed to open or deployed too late, sometimes flinging the person upward like an accidental trampoline. Drivers hated it. Pedestrians didn't trust it, and insurance companies asked to not be contacted again. The real legacy of the safety net wasn't safety. It was optics. It let automakers claim innovation while shifting responsibility away from infrastructure, regulation, or common sense. In a way, it was the ancestor of today's smart car features that beep at you instead of just installing proper crosswalks. But perhaps the most telling part? It lasted barely a year. By 1928, it had been scooped right out of history. Still, the dream of wearable safety hadn't died. In fact, one stylish inventor had a bold vision. What if your coat could save your life by doubling as a parachute? 16. The parachute coat, 1911. In an era when buildings were getting taller and human confidence was at an all-time high, it was only a matter of time before someone looked up at a skyscraper, then down at their fashionable overcoat and thought, why not both? Thus was born the parachute coat of 1911, a dapper double-duty garment that promised style, warmth, and the faint hope of surviving a plunge off a 10-story ledge. It looked like a regular coat. That was the first problem. Hidden within its tailored seams were dozens of folded panels, cords, and hopeful engineering, all designed to burst open mid-fall into a fully functioning parachute. The idea was bold. Walk into a building looking sharp, walk out the window looking alive. Unfortunately, no one seemed to tell the coat how physics worked. The deployment mechanism was vague at best. Some versions required the wearer to tug a hidden string, which would allegedly release a parachute from the back panel, assuming it didn't tangle in your legs, your arms, or your rapidly growing sense of regret. In tests, the coat usually opened a little. Sometimes it opened late. Occasionally it opened into a knotted heap, flapping bravely but doing very little else. One infamous demonstration took place in Paris, where the inventor, a tailor with absolute confidence and zero skydiving experience, leapt from the Eiffel Tower wearing his own creation. The results were not reassuring, and the coat did little to catch on afterward, except in dark humor circles. Still, the idea didn't die immediately. Versions of parachute clothing popped up throughout the next few decades, usually accompanied by newspaper articles featuring words like miraculous and unwise. Each iteration promised safety. None delivered. But the parachute coat wasn't just about survival. It was about fashion fused with fantasy. That belief that we can stitch our way out of danger, or at least fall stylishly trying. And if falling through the sky didn't work, maybe we could start with something smaller, like pedaling across a lake on a bicycle built to sink. 17. The aquatic bicycle, 1890. Before jet skis, before paddle boats, before someone decided lakes should be relaxing, there was the aquatic bicycle of 1890. Designed for those who felt land was too boring and boats too mainstream, this contraption aimed to merge the freedom of cycling with the grace of water travel. What it actually delivered was damp failure, wet socks, and a lesson in buoyancy the hard way. The basic idea was straightforward. Take a normal bicycle and mount it on pontoons, or attach floating barrels beneath the wheels, then pedal across lakes, rivers, or, for the truly optimistic, oceans. Promotional sketches showed dapper gentlemen cruising effortlessly across calm waters, waving politely to passing ducks. Reality looked more like someone riding a collapsing scaffolding into a swamp. The first problem? Weight. Bicycles, in the 1890s, were not known for their light frames. Add steel supports, wooden pontoons, and a fully clothed Victorian gentleman, and you've got a recipe for a slow descent. Many test rides began with cautious pedaling and ended with frantic splashing as the entire apparatus listed sideways like a wounded sea creature. Then there was the propulsion issue. Pedals turned wheels. Wheels didn't turn water. So inventors added paddles, fins, or rotating belts to move the craft forward, all of which worked poorly. One model required so much force to move a few feet that the rider burned more calories than a rowing team while moving at the speed of continental drift. Some designs even claimed to be amphibious, able to ride straight into the water from land. These were particularly dangerous, since the moment of transition usually resulted in the rider being thrown forward, the bike tipping backward, and a slow-motion collapse into a pond. Despite its failures, the aquatic bicycle refused to fully disappear. It continues to haunt lake resorts and novelty rental shops, forever promising a calm, leisurely ride that never comes. But at least it had oxygen. The same couldn't be said for what came next, a bold attempt to ride a bicycle, underwater. 18. The submarine bicycle, 1984. By 1984, the world had witnessed moon landings, color television, and computers small enough to fit on desks. And yet, humanity's greatest minds still asked the big questions. Like, what if we took the least aquatic form of transportation and used it at the bottom of the sea? Thus emerged the submarine bicycle, an invention that boldly ignored physics, biology, and several lifetimes of common sense. The plan was to create a bicycle that could be pedaled underwater. Not on the water, in it, beneath the surface, ideally with the rider enclosed in a suit or tank. Practically, however, it was just a metal frame with fins, paddles, and the faint hope that moving your legs in slow circles could overcome both water resistance and natural buoyancy. It didn't work. The core issue? Water is dense, much denser than air. Pedaling through it requires immense force, especially when your only source of power is your own two legs and a device designed to function on asphalt. Tests were conducted in shallow pools and calm bays. The results were slow, exhausting, and deeply humbling. Riders moved inches per minute. Some tipped over. One inventor claimed to have achieved stable motion, though witnesses say he drifted 5 feet in 20 minutes and had to be rescued by scuba divers. Breathing was the other problem. Riders were either tethered to surface-level air tanks, wore full diving helmets, or used rudimentary snorkel systems. All of them made steering difficult, balance worse, and the entire endeavor feel more like underwater punishment than innovation. And yet, the submarine bicycle had its fans. Dreamers, hobbyists, people who watched James Bond movies and believed in the romance of gadget-based exploration. A few even built their own versions in garages, only to discover that underwater cycling was less spy thriller and more very wet panic. Eventually, the concept submerged for good, but not before inspiring one final act of lounge-based lunacy, a rocket-powered recliner that promised to bring liftoff to your living room. 19. The Jetpack Chair, 1973. In 1973, someone looked at a lounge chair and thought, "This needs propulsion." Thus was born the Jetpack Chair, a Frankenstein hybrid of suburban comfort and high-octane instability. The idea was as wild as it sounds. A recliner retrofitted with a small rocket engine designed to launch the seated occupant into the air like some kind of airborne armchair aristocrat. It was marketed under the guise of innovation, with early sketches showing a person floating peacefully above the ground, legs crossed, drink in hand, as if the sky were just another room in their split-level home. But what those sketches didn't show were the exhaust burns, the control issues, or the fact that the chair had no real way to land, gently or otherwise. The propulsion system was crude at best, cobbled together from miniature jets and wishful thinking. The liftoff was uneven. The steering was non-existent. Pilots, if you could call them that, reported getting a few feet off the ground before tipping sideways and scorching their lawns, porches, or dignity. One test flight ended with the operator spiraling into a patio umbrella. Another clipped a birdbath and landed in a hedge. The chair survived. The hedge did not. The military briefly glanced at the idea and then looked away. Fast. Meanwhile, civilians were more fascinated than afraid. The Jetpack Chair lived on in late-night TV segments, backyard science fairs, and the hearts of those who truly believed gravity was optional if your recliner had enough thrust. Eventually, safety concerns and scorched upholstery retired the Jetpack Chair. But it raised an important question. Why walk? Why drive? When you could simply sit and ascend? And if chairs didn't need steering wheels, maybe cars didn't either. Which brings us to the next step in vehicular innovation, removing the one part that tells it where to go. 20. The car with no steering wheel, 1957. Imagine driving a car with no steering wheel. Now imagine doing it in 1957 during an era when cars were made of pure steel, had fins like sea monsters, and the brakes were more of a suggestion than a feature. Into this high-stakes automotive ecosystem came the car with no steering wheel, a bold attempt to reinvent the driving experience by replacing the classic wheel with twin control levers. The promise was futuristic minimalism. The execution was glorified joystick mayhem. The two-lever system was supposed to offer precise directional control. Left lever for turning left, right lever for turning right, both together for forward. Easy, right? Except it wasn't. Drivers reported confusion, overcorrections, and a complete lack of muscle memory. One test driver described it as trying to drive a rhino with chopsticks. There were no power steering assists, no fail-safes, and definitely no training programs. You just got in, grabbed the levers, and hoped the road was wide and forgiving. Spoiler, it usually wasn't. Maneuvering was jerky at best. Parking became a comedy sketch. And at highway speeds, the car had all the grace of a shopping cart on a ski slope. The levers also had a delay. the kind that made every lane change feel like a dramatic reenactment. Honking became a full-body workout. And three-point turns? Forget it. You needed 12 and a prayer. The car never made it to mass production. The prototype was quietly shelved after a series of embarrassing test drives and one particularly memorable demonstration where the inventor accidentally reversed into a hedge while trying to go forward. By 1958, the idea had been firmly parked in the never again category. But the dream of changing how we interact with the world, whether through levers, rockets, or odd fashion choices, wasn't over. Because before Americans gave up on logic completely, they tried one more home innovation, one that involved cribs, windows, and absolutely no fear of heights. 21. The baby cage, 1930s. Some inventions fail because they don't work. Others fail because they work too well at highlighting just how strange we are. The baby cage, a product of 1930s urban parenting, fits firmly in the second category. It was a wire-framed box that you could attach to the outside of your apartment window. Inside it, your infant. The goal, according to its promoters, was simple and pure. Give babies access to fresh air and sunlight in cramped city apartments where backyard space didn't exist. But instead of opening a window or taking the child for a walk, parents were encouraged to suspend their offspring several stories above city sidewalks inside a glorified birdcage. The baby was meant to nap or play safely, with the cage's floor lined with a small mattress and a toy or two. Meanwhile, pedestrians below looked up and tried to act normal as tiny feet dangled above them. Photos from the era show cheerful mothers leaning out their windows, waving proudly at their child, who is casually sunbathing 6 stories above traffic. Manufacturers claimed it was perfectly safe, citing reinforced steel, secure window fittings, and the baby's inability to climb. But neighbors were less convinced. Complaints poured in. One woman refused to walk under the cages for fear of baby fallout. The Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents in the UK even got involved, questioning the entire premise. The cages were eventually banned in many cities, not because of any reported tragedies, but because public discomfort finally won out. The image of a baby swinging in the breeze like laundry was just too much, even for the laissez-faire standards of the early 20th century. Still, the baby cage reminds us of a certain design philosophy. If there's a problem, no yard, no stroller, no time, just bolt something weird to a wall and call it a solution. Which is the exact same energy behind the next invention, a clamp for your eyelids, for those who believe sleep is optional and blinking is a sign of weakness. 22. The mechanical eyelid opener, 1923. In 1923, someone decided the real enemy of productivity wasn't fatigue, it was eyelids. Specifically, their offensive tendency to close. Enter the mechanical eyelid opener, a torturous little device designed to clamp your upper lids open so you could read, study, or work for longer periods without the interference of your body's basic survival instincts. It was marketed primarily to students, the original burnout demographic, who were expected to absorb Latin declensions in economic theory without blinking. Literally, the device looked like a cross between opera glasses and dental tongs. It featured a spring-loaded clamp that attached to your forehead and your eyelids simultaneously, creating constant tension to keep your eyes wide open in a permanent state of alarm. Early adopters quickly discovered a major flaw. It hurt. A lot. The tension caused headaches, watering eyes, and what one newspaper politely described as ocular fatigue bordering on hysteria. In an era before ergonomic anything, this was pitched as cutting edge, a personal productivity tool that didn't ask whether your sanity was part of the cost. The worst part? It kind of worked, temporarily. Until your eyes dried out or the spring failed or you sneezed and accidentally launched the device across the room. Teachers began to notice students blinking out of sync with reality, glassy-eyed and vibrating with anxiety. It was less an educational aid and more a crash course in existential dread. Eventually, the eyelid opener was phased out in favor of more subtle torture devices, like caffeine and guilt. But its legacy lives on in every overworked, over-caffeinated person who has ever propped their eyelids up with ambition and spite. Because America never really stopped trying to engineer alertness. And speaking of electricity, that brings us to the next evolutionary step. If springs couldn't keep you beautiful, maybe electricity could. Why suffer in silence when you could shock your acne into submission? 23. The electric mask for acne, 1950s. In the 1950s, the atomic age of optimism and questionable skincare, the electric mask for acne promised a bold new solution. Zap your zits with tiny jolts of electricity. It sounded scientific. It looked like a villain origin story. And it was marketed to teenagers with the kind of aggressive hope usually reserved for miracle cures and lottery tickets. The mask resembled a metallic facial plate complete with wiring and switch controls. You'd strap it onto your face, plug it in, and let the low-voltage current stimulate your skin into clarity. The theory was that electricity would open pores, increase circulation, and somehow evict the oil, dirt, and bad decisions lurking beneath your epidermis. In practice, the mask was clunky, uncomfortable, and vaguely terrifying. Most users reported mild shocks, tingling sensations, and the unnerving smell of heated rubber. One particularly infamous model had a dial labeled Intensity, a feature that sounded empowering until you realized you were guessing what level of facial electrocution counted as moderate. Dermatologists were skeptical. Some warned about skin burns and long-term irritation. Others simply pointed out that electrical stimulation doesn't cure acne. It just gives you something new to focus on while you wait for your pimples to come back. Despite the concerns, the mask found a temporary niche among desperate teens and image-obsessed adults. It showed up in beauty salons, catalogs, and the occasional sitcom punchline. But it never delivered long-term results. And as skin science progressed, the electric facial craze quietly fizzled out. Still, it set a precedent. Discomfort in the name of beauty. That if you couldn't naturally glow, maybe you could artificially buzz your way there. And if you thought that was intense, just wait until someone straps a helmet to your head, fills it with steam, and tells you it's the future of fashion-forward hair. 24. The automatic hair waver, 1930s. If the 1930s were about surviving the Depression with dignity, the automatic hair waver was a bold attempt to look glamorous while doing it. This monstrous salon machine looked like a cross between an octopus and a medieval chandelier. It promised perfectly crimped, waved hair, the kind seen on silver screen goddesses, without the hassle of manual curling or consistent results. The machine functioned by lowering a heated helmet over the customer's head, which then activated mechanical arms designed to grip, press, and mold hair into elegant waves. Steam, heat, and pressure worked in tandem, or against each other. It wasn't always clear which. The result was a sensory experience that teetered between beauty ritual and anxiety attack. The heat was intense, not unbearable, but enough to make you second-guess your decisions. The clamps were strong. Some customers claimed the weight of the machine left their necks sore for days. Others described the noise as something between a hissing radiator and a ticking bomb. Yet women lined up for it. Because it worked. Most of the time. Hair came out sculpted and structured. But the price was discomfort, and occasionally fainting spells. One salon reportedly installed smelling salts as a standard part of the experience. Another offered neck massages afterward, partly out of sympathy, partly to prevent lawsuits. The machine's design also came with a fatal flaw. It lacked adaptability. If your hair was too thick, too fine, or too damp, the results varied wildly. And if you moved, even slightly, mid-treatment, the entire style could skew sideways, resulting in a lopsided look known, unkindly, as the half-wave horror. Eventually, more user-friendly curling irons and rollers replaced the giant waving machines, but they remain iconic, frozen in black and white photos where women sit motionless beneath metallic tentacles, awaiting transformation. And speaking of risky morning routines, what if your alarm clock didn't just buzz, but brewed hot coffee 2 inches from your sleeping face? 25. The bedside coffee alarm, 1970s. In the 1970s, a decade defined by lava lamps, shag carpeting, and questionable decisions in product design, someone decided to fix mornings once and for all. The result? The bedside coffee alarm. Half alarm clock, half brewing system, all potential fire hazard. It was built for the caffeine addict who wanted to wake up not to the sound of a bell, but to the smell of hot coffee brewing inches from their unconscious face. The device combined a timer, a heating element, a carafe, and blind optimism. At the programmed time, the heating plate would activate, water would begin to boil, and, in theory, a perfect cup of coffee would be waiting for you the moment you opened your eyes. In practice, the experience was more chaotic. The gurgling steam sounded like a dragon gargling. The heat radiated like a toaster on your nightstand. And the smell? Strong enough to wake you even if the alarm didn't. Placement was everything. If the machine sat too close to your pillow, you risked singeing your hair. Too far, and you'd still have to get out of bed, which kind of defeated the point. Some users tried balancing it on top of stacks of books. Others set it up on rolling carts. One enterprising soul duct-taped it to the wall above his bed, reportedly describing it as morning motivation via gravity. Burns, spills, and electrical mishaps eventually caught up with the design. Fire marshals weren't impressed, nor were groggy users who discovered that a misaligned lid could lead to boiling water streaming directly onto their sheets. The product quietly faded from store shelves, leaving behind only the dream that one day technology might let you wake up with coffee already in hand. But the 1970s weren't done pushing the limits of personal convenience. If your mornings weren't stressful enough, why not add robotic limbs brushing your teeth while your head stayed completely still? 26. The automatic toothbrush hat, 1987. Some inventions solve problems. Others just are problems. Delivered in plastic and powered by AA batteries. The automatic toothbrush hat, released in 1987, falls decisively into the latter category. It was a helmet outfitted with tiny motorized arms designed to brush your teeth for you. All you had to do was wear it, and surrender your dignity. At a glance, it looked like a sci-fi prop gone rogue. The device featured a bulky plastic cap with 2 flexible arms ending in toothbrush heads. Once activated, the arms moved in synchronized arcs toward your mouth, brushing back and forth in what the manufacturer called a gentle, efficient dental motion. What it felt like, according to users, was being jabbed repeatedly by tiny, over-caffeinated dentists. It wasn't hands-free so much as control-free. You couldn't adjust the pressure, or the angle, or the rhythm. If your mouth wasn't perfectly aligned with the default motion, the brushes would either jab your gums or miss your teeth entirely. One user described the experience as being attacked by a polite but confused robot. The device made noise. A lot of it. A high-pitched mechanical whirring that sounded like a dentist's drill and a broken fan had a baby. Early reviewers noted that the sound alone was enough to wake up roommates, spouses, and possibly nearby wildlife. And yet, it sold. Briefly. Mostly as a gag gift and occasionally to people with mobility issues looking for genuine hands-free hygiene solutions. But even among its niche audience, it struggled. The complexity, bulk, and high failure rate meant most helmets were used once, laughed at, and then quietly stored in closets next to other mechanical regrets. Ultimately, the toothbrush hat vanished, a casualty of good intentions and bad engineering. But if robotic oral care wasn't your thing, maybe you'd prefer something warmer. Say, a full-body plastic suit designed to trap your own sweat until your body begged for mercy. 27. The home sauna suit, 1960s. In the 1960s, an era of self-improvement fads, crash diets, and sweaty optimism, the home sauna suit promised to melt your problems away. Literally, it was a full-body plastic outfit that sealed tightly at the wrists, ankles, and neck, designed to trap heat and make you sweat profusely. Not at the gym, not in a spa, just anywhere. Advertised as a miracle for weight loss, detox, and radiant skin, the sauna suit looked like a cross between a hazmat uniform and a baked potato wrapper. Early ads featured beaming housewives vacuuming in their suits, their sweat reportedly melting away inches. One even showed a man mowing the lawn in his suit, which raises immediate concerns for heat stroke and basic decision-making. The science behind the suit was flimsy at best. The weight loss it produced came primarily from dehydration, not fat reduction. But for a generation sold on sweat as purification, it felt like progress. The suit amplified your body heat, turning a brisk walk into a personal inferno. Users emerged drenched, dizzy, and often delighted, right up until they rehydrated and realized nothing had changed. Health experts were not amused. Doctors warned that overheating could lead to dizziness, nausea, and in extreme cases, unconsciousness. Still, sales continued. Because for every cautious physician, there were 5 more infomercials promising a slimmer, shinier version of yourself, all from the comfort of your linoleum kitchen. Eventually, common sense caught up. The suits were discontinued or rebranded into sweat enhancers for professional athletes, though even they preferred not to marinate themselves like microwave dinners. Yet the sauna suit endures as a symbol of a very specific kind of hope, that suffering, if wrapped in vinyl and marketed correctly, can feel productive. And if sweating wasn't your problem, maybe baldness was. After all, what could go wrong with a helmet powered by mysterious radio energy? 28. The hair-growing helmet, 1920s. The 1920s were roaring, flapper-filled, and rife with technological promises that ranged from electrified corsets to vibrating slimming belts. So when someone introduced a helmet that claimed to grow your hair back using radio energy, no one blinked. Because of course they didn't. The helmet was too heavy for blinking to be an option. Marketed to balding men desperate to maintain their social status and hats that didn't slip, the hair-growing helmet was a bulky contraption made of metal, wires, and what could generously be called hope. The pitch? Electromagnetic stimulation. The idea was that radio waves, a term thrown around very liberally in the 1920s, would somehow penetrate the scalp and wake up dormant follicles, like some kind of AM/FM resurrection. Users were instructed to wear the helmet for several hours a day, sit quietly, and let the currents do their work. They did, patiently, faithfully, and baldly. Weeks passed, then months, still bald. The only thing that grew was disappointment. Some users reported tingling sensations, which marketers insisted meant the helmet was activating circulation. Others reported headaches, sweat, and the occasional urge to throw the thing out a window. Lawsuits eventually followed. The science, if you could call it that, collapsed under scrutiny, and the term radio energy was quietly retired to the marketing graveyard of ambiguous buzzwords. And yet, the dream never truly died. Variations on the hair-growing helmet continue to exist to this day, rebranded with LEDs, lasers, and new acronyms, all chasing that same myth: effortless regrowth through applied technology. But if hair loss couldn't be fixed by helmets, maybe poor posture could be fixed by electricity. Because the next invention didn't just judge you for slouching, it shocked you for it. 29. The anti-sleep alarm chair, 1910. Long before office wellness programs and standing desks, the early 20th century had its own answer to workplace lethargy: the anti-sleep alarm chair. Built not to comfort, but to correct, this upright terror was designed to deliver a jolt of electricity whenever its occupant began to doze off or, worse, slouch. Originally installed in factories and schools, The chair featured a pressure-sensitive backrest and a rudimentary wiring system that detected changes in posture. Sit upright and you were safe. Lean back even slightly, and the system activated a mild electric shock. Not enough to harm, allegedly, but certainly enough to snap you back into alertness, terror, or both. Manufacturers claimed it improved productivity and posture. Employees, unsurprisingly, did not share the enthusiasm. Reports quickly surfaced of startled workers spilling ink, breaking tools, or simply leaping out of the chair mid-jolt. One factory replaced them after a worker, reacting instinctively to a zap, threw a wrench across the room. Children weren't spared either. Some schools experimented with them for disciplinary purposes, claiming it taught proper study habits. All it really taught was distrust in furniture. Despite the backlash, some companies defended the chairs as motivational. After all, nothing keeps you awake like a potential tasering from beneath. But eventually, public sentiment caught up. The chairs were deemed inhumane, and legislation slowly pushed them out of existence. Today they survive only in black and white photos and the occasional steampunk fever dream, reminders that punishment disguised as productivity has a long, weird history. And speaking of electricity, the next invention took that fascination to a much more relaxing place. Or at least it tried, because nothing says pampering like sitting in a bath full of water and live electrical current. 30. The electric bath, 1900s. At the turn of the 20th century, electricity was still new, mysterious, and, according to some, miraculous. It could light homes, power factories, and apparently heal the human body. Thus was born the electric bath, a copper-lined tub filled with warm water, into which low-level electrical currents were introduced to rejuvenate the body and stimulate the nerves. It sounded luxurious, it looked industrial, and it felt questionable. Patients, because this was billed as a medical treatment, would climb into the tub while technicians, read enthusiastic hotel staff or underpaid nurses, adjusted dials and switches. Electrodes placed in the water would pulse gently, sending subtle zaps throughout the bath. Proponents claimed it could cure everything from fatigue and arthritis to hysteria and general malaise. The sensation was described as tingling, sometimes pleasant, often strange. But comfort wasn't the priority. The real appeal was novelty. People didn't fully understand electricity, but they believed in it. That belief, mixed with a little showmanship, turned spas and health resorts into mini-mad scientist labs. Unfortunately, the science behind it was lacking. Any benefits were likely the result of warm water and placebo, and while the currents were supposed to be low voltage, wiring standards at the time were inconsistent. Malfunctions occurred, bathtubs shorted. No one was seriously hurt, as far as we know, but even mild zaps in a bathtub were enough to make some guests skip their second appointment. By the 1920s, electric baths had mostly disappeared, replaced by less controversial treatments like mud wraps and cucumber water. But the idea never entirely went away. To this day, devices that promise electrical rejuvenation, from vibrating massage chairs to electrotherapy pads, still echo that same turn-of-the-century optimism. Because the promise of electricity as a miracle cure never quite died. It just got rebranded. And speaking of branding, what if you wanted to simulate randomness over and over again without ever having to flip a coin yourself? 31. The Perpetual Coin Flipper, 1912. In 1912, deep in the era of mechanical fascination and boardroom showmanship, someone finally asked the question, why waste precious wrist energy flipping a coin when a machine can do it forever? Thus emerged the Perpetual Coin Flipper, a small desktop device that promised endless randomness with zero human effort. Built with springs, gears, and a vaguely menacing lever, the flipper was meant for gamblers, decision-makers, and people who just liked seeing metal go airborne. Its appeal was twofold: consistency and spectacle. You loaded a coin into its tiny chamber, cranked the mechanism, and watched it launch into the air on a programmed arc, land on a velvet-lined surface, and reveal your fate. At least, that was the idea. In reality, the device rarely made it past the third toss. The internal mechanisms jammed. Springs wore out. Coins got stuck mid-air or bounced off the table with such force that users lost them under furniture. One reviewer at the time noted it was perfect for simulating the illusion of control before actual chaos sets in. It was marketed as a novelty for offices and gaming parlors, a conversation starter, an executive toy, a demonstration of man's ability to over-engineer even the simplest gesture. And for a brief moment, it found a small, confused audience. Some users reported genuine affection for its rhythmic clatter. Others used it to stall during meetings. A few claimed it helped settle arguments, though mostly it just started new ones about whether the toss was valid. Eventually, the flipper faded. Not because people stopped flipping coins, but because even the laziest decision-makers realized they didn't need a mechanical oracle to choose between soup or salad. Still, it captured something timeless, the human urge to automate fate, to take randomness, dress it up in brass and gears, and pretend it answers questions. But if deciding with a machine wasn't enough, how about talking to one? Specifically, your dog? 32. The Dog Translator Collar, 2000s. In the early 2000s, a period fueled by early internet weirdness and consumer tech optimism, someone decided that barking was simply an outdated communication method. Why not translate your dog's emotions into English? Enter the Dog Translator Collar, a plastic device worn around a dog's neck that claimed to interpret vocal tones and pitch into human phrases. The collar worked, in theory, by analyzing the pitch, duration, and frequency of your dog's barks. A built-in speaker would then spit out a canned phrase like, "I'm hungry," "I want to play," or, everyone's favorite, "You're annoying me." The manufacturer claimed it was based on years of vocal emotion mapping. Critics, meanwhile, suspected it was based on a magic 8-ball and some light wishful thinking. Despite its dubious accuracy, the collar sold surprisingly well. Dog owners, always looking for deeper connections, strapped them onto their pets with hope in their hearts. And sure enough, the collar talked, repeatedly, at inopportune moments, in voices that sounded suspiciously like bad cartoon auditions. The real problem wasn't that the device got things wrong, it was that it got too much attention. Some dogs barked constantly, leading to a nonstop loop of robotic commentary. Others barked only once, prompting worried owners to spend hours trying to provoke a response. Eventually, people realized that the collar wasn't translating anything. It was just triggering random voice lines based on volume levels. Still, for a brief magical window, pet owners everywhere believed their dog was a misunderstood philosopher. The illusion didn't last long. The novelty wore off, the batteries died, and the collar joined the tech junk drawer alongside voice-activated light switches and USB neckties. But what if, instead of making your dog lighter in spirit, you wanted to make yourself lighter in reality? The next invention tried just that, with belts, buckles, and a very generous interpretation of the laws of physics. 33. The Anti-Gravity Belt, 1979. In 1979, someone decided that gravity had simply overstayed its welcome. Tapping into the disco-fueled delusion of the decade, they unveiled the anti-gravity belt, a wearable apparatus that claimed to reduce your body weight by up to 10%. How? With gravitational redirection technology, which sounds impressive right up until you realize it means absolutely nothing. The belt looked like a cross between a wrestling championship strap and something your chiropractor might warn you about. It wrapped tightly around the waist and featured a network of internal elastic bands, tension cables, and what the marketing called anti-weight nodes. The science, according to its creators, involved redistributing mass load to lift zones. Translation: a glorified corset. Wearers were promised less joint pain, better posture, and the ability to jump higher with less effort. Some users swore they could feel the lift. although that feeling may have just been from being cinched within an inch of their spinal health. Others reported that stairs felt slightly easier to climb, but it turned out that wearing a giant belt made you more mindful of your movements, not magically lighter. Fitness experts and physicists alike scoffed. Gravity, they explained, doesn't care how many buckles you wear. But the dream of wearable weightlessness had traction, especially among those who viewed science more as a vibe than a discipline. Like many fad devices of the era, the anti-gravity belt was eventually discontinued after a flurry of refund requests and one unfortunate incident involving a treadmill, a slip, and an unexpectedly airborne customer. But the legacy remained. Americans still chase the fantasy of effortless improvement, to move faster, feel lighter, look better, without changing anything at all. And if strapping yourself into elastic hope didn't tell the truth, maybe a portable lie detector could, or at least pretend to. 34. The Portable Lie Detector, 1962. In the Cold War-era haze of paranoia and pseudoscience, 1962 gifted the world with the portable lie detector, a pocket-sized device that claimed to detect deception based on palm sweat. Because nothing says truth like moisture. The logic behind it came from traditional polygraph principles. When someone lies, their body allegedly betrays them through involuntary responses. Heart rate, temperature, sweat. The portable lie detector simplified all of that into one crude metric: how clammy your hand was. Place your thumb on the metal pad, ask a question, and wait for a red light if dishonesty was detected. Or a green one if you passed the machine's highly questionable standard of honesty. It sold surprisingly well, mostly to suspicious spouses, anxious parents, and hobbyist interrogators who liked their truth machines buzzy and battery-powered. It appeared in novelty shops, mail-order catalogs, and even a few office meetings where managers tried to use it as a team-building exercise. Spoiler, it did not build teams. The device worked, in the sense that it reacted to something. Nervousness? Sure. Temperature? Possibly. Sweaty palms from being put on the spot? Absolutely. But it couldn't distinguish between guilt and stage fright, lies and lactose intolerance. Everyone became a suspect, especially anyone who had just climbed stairs or accidentally thought too hard about their alibi. One overzealous user claimed to use it during first dates. Another reportedly brought it to family reunions. Eventually, the consensus was that the machine wasn't revealing lies. It was just confirming that most people get sweaty when you accuse them of something. Scientific communities quickly dismissed it. But for a moment, America genuinely considered outsourcing trust to a blinking plastic box. And why not? Truth is messy, sweating is easy. Next up came a product that promised to protect your home with lasers, or at least sound effects. Because when fear meets fiction, the line between security system and sci-fi prop gets very blurry. 35. The Home Laser Blaster, 1985. In 1985, during a time when lasers were less a scientific tool and more a visual metaphor for the future, the home laser blaster arrived on the scene. It promised cutting-edge home defense through what could only be described as glorified theater lighting and wishful thinking. The device resembled something you'd find in a toy aisle: a boxy unit with plastic vents, a blinking LED, and a speaker that emitted high-pitched whines whenever someone entered a room. It didn't actually fire anything. It didn't detect movement with any precision. But it did look vaguely dangerous, especially in the dark, and that was apparently enough for the target market. It was sold as a DIY home defense solution for people who wanted high-tech deterrence but weren't quite ready to install real alarms. Scare off intruders with the power of sound and light, the packaging boasted, right above an image of a burglar presumably being stunned by a disco light and a screeching modem. Functionally, it was a motion sensor hooked up to a noisemaker. The laser was a red LED beam that didn't track anything. The sound, often compared to an arcade machine being electrocuted, was intended to make intruders panic. In practice, it confused pets, startled toddlers, and got unplugged during every family gathering. Despite this, some users swore by it. They believed the sound alone would startle a would-be thief, and maybe it did, assuming that thief had a heart condition or an extreme dislike of 8-bit soundtracks. Eventually, the novelty wore off. Real security systems became more affordable, and the idea of defending your home with sci-fi sound effects became less clever and more mildly embarrassing. Today, the home laser blaster is a relic, a reminder that sometimes we're more interested in looking protected than actually being safe. And if you thought weaponized sound was strange, wait until you hear about the next invention. A robotic book butler that turned reading into an exercise in patience, posture, and back pain. 36. The remote-controlled book holder, 1994. By 1994, remote controls had taken over every aspect of modern life, from televisions to ceiling fans to novelty fish that sang on command. So it was only a matter of time before someone tried to apply the same principle to reading. Thus was born the remote-controlled book holder, a 40-pound motorized monstrosity that promised to turn your pages for you so you wouldn't have to lift a finger. The device consisted of a large metal frame with 2 robotic arms, a base strong enough to support a full encyclopedia, and a remote with big clunky buttons marked "Turn Left" and "Turn Right." The system was designed to grip each page gently, lift it, and flip it over. A ballet of precision that rarely went as planned. The arms often misjudged their grip, either tearing delicate pages or flipping multiple ones at once. Hardcover books were too heavy. Paperbacks were too floppy. If you dared to read outdoors, a breeze could send the machine into a confused spiral of page-chasing chaos. And if you adjusted your posture mid-chapter, good luck realigning the device. It had all the flexibility of a grandfather clock, but its greatest flaw was its physical footprint. It wasn't just heavy. It was intrusive. It needed its own table, its own power outlet, and ideally, its own room. Users joked that setting it up was harder than reading the book in the first place. Still, a handful of early tech enthusiasts and gadget lovers defended it. "It's great for long novels," one user wrote, "assuming you don't mind restarting every time you shift in your chair." The remote-controlled book holder quickly became a punchline in the world of luxury absurdity. Eventually, it joined the growing graveyard of devices that tried to automate basic human motions and failed with dramatic flair. But while some gadgets whispered gently, others let you scream, literally. The next invention wasn't designed to help you cope with stress. It was designed to contain it, in a jar. 37. The Scream Jar, 1998. In 1998, amidst the rise of self-help culture, corporate cubicles, and desktop Zen gardens, one invention emerged with the emotional subtlety of a wrecking ball: the Scream Jar. Its purpose? To give stressed-out individuals a place to scream, discreetly of course, by yelling into a small sound-muffling container. Think stress ball meets primal therapy, with a lid. The concept was simple. The jar, often made of thick plastic or ceramic, contained a foam lining designed to absorb sound. You were supposed to hold it up to your mouth, scream into it with all your bottled-up fury, and then screw the lid back on as if sealing your emotions inside a Tupperware of shame. Some models even featured decorative labels like "Feelings Vault" or "Emergency Use Only," as if screaming was a quirky hobby instead of an emotional warning light. Marketed primarily to office workers, overachieving students, and overwhelmed parents, the Scream Jar popped up in novelty catalogs and gift shops with slogans like "Silently Losing Your Mind" in style. One version even claimed to reduce blood pressure, citing a very informal study involving 3 interns and a lot of Red Bull. Naturally, the effectiveness was debatable. Yes, it muffled sound, but not completely. Many users found that their co-workers could still hear them, just enough to worry. Others reported that screaming into a jar alone in your office felt less therapeutic and more like rehearsing for a one-person play no one asked to see. One early adopter described it as cathartic but weirdly humid. Ultimately, the scream jar didn't fix stress, but it did give people permission to acknowledge it, and then immediately shove it back into a container, which felt oddly on brand for the late 90s. Of course, not all noise-canceling inventions were designed to handle people. Some were built to confront an ancient urban menace, pigeons. Because if you can't yell at a bird, why not send a drone to do it for you? 38. The security drone for pigeons, 2002. In 2002, urban America declared a new kind of war. Not on crime, not on traffic, but on pigeons. Enter the security drone for pigeons, an invention that promised to scare away unwanted birds with modern technology, replacing the humble scarecrow with something more dystopian and mildly insulting to both humans and birds. The drone, more of a hovering plastic menace than a true UAV, was outfitted with speakers, flapping appendages, and in some cases, LED eyes that glowed red for dramatic effect. When activated, it emitted predator noises, mechanical chirps, or startling beeps intended to frighten pigeons away from rooftops, balconies, and public monuments. At first it kind of worked. Pigeons were startled. People were startled. Dogs were very startled. But the success was short-lived. Pigeons, it turns out, are quick learners and even quicker cynics. Within days they returned, perching on the drones, nesting under them, or simply ignoring them altogether. One report from a city park noted that a group of pigeons actually followed the drone around, as if curious to see what this new loud, twitchy sky thing might feed them. Meanwhile, humans weren't much happier. Residents complained about the noise. Maintenance workers had to chase down crashed units. Children cried at the glowing red eyes. In one case, a drone short-circuited mid-flight and dive-bombed a wedding cake during an outdoor ceremony, a moment later immortalized in the happy couple's photo album. Despite its failures, the security drone for pigeons wasn't entirely without legacy. It proved that modern problems couldn't always be solved with flashy beeping overkill. Sometimes a plastic owl still does the trick. But if drones couldn't restore order, perhaps the answer lay in miniature weaponry. Because for all of America's educational ingenuity, there was one invention that stood out for being as dangerous as it was tiny, the pocket guillotine. 39. The pocket guillotine, 1895. In 1895, someone took one look at a paper cutter and thought, what this really needs is more drama. The result? The pocket guillotine, a handheld device shaped like a miniature execution tool, marketed as the ultimate paper-trimming gadget for students, clerks, and lovers of unnecessarily theatrical stationery. It looked exactly like you'd expect. A tiny upright frame with a vertical blade that dropped down when triggered, slicing through paper with a satisfying and slightly alarming snap. Originally designed to cut small stacks of paper or tickets, the device quickly found popularity among schoolchildren, office workers, and collectors of oddities. One ad even pitched it as precision cutting with a sense of authority. There were immediate concerns. Teachers hated it. Children loved it. The blade, while small, was sharp enough to raise eyebrows and draw blood, particularly from curious fingers or unlucky erasers. Some students used it for crafts. Others used it to intimidate classmates or decapitate pencil toppers. One school principal reportedly banned it after catching a group of boys holding mock trials for paper dolls. Manufacturers defended the design, insisting it was perfectly safe when used as directed, a phrase that tends to appear right before something is pulled from shelves. Parents weren't convinced. Neither were school boards. The product was quietly removed from most stores by the early 20th century, relegated to curiosity shops and warning posters about the dangers of mixing classroom boredom with pocket-sized guillotines. Yet the pocket guillotine remains a perfect snapshot of a certain kind of invention, one that elevates a mundane task into a melodramatic performance. It didn't make paper cutting more efficient, it just made it feel more decisive. And if slicing wasn't your thing, perhaps shooting was. Because just a few years later, someone decided that what office workers truly needed was a cannon for their desk. 40. The desktop cannon, 2003. By 2003, the modern office had become a battlefield of passive aggression, caffeinated tension, and ergonomic despair. In this cubicle-choked wasteland, someone introduced the desktop cannon, a miniature artillery piece designed to relieve stress by firing tiny projectiles across your workspace. Because nothing says professionalism like launching foam missiles at Greg from accounting, the cannon was compact, sleek, and came with a set of soft pellets, sometimes rubber, sometimes foam, depending on how badly the manufacturer misunderstood workplace liability. The loading mechanism involved a spring or air pump system, and some high-end models even boasted adjustable trajectories, allowing you to arc shots over conference room partitions or sneak a stealthy strike during a Zoom call. Marketed as an executive toy, it joined the ranks of desk gadgets that straddled the line between stress relief and workplace hazard. Early adopters used them for pranks, boredom, or passive-aggressive diplomacy. "You'll know how I feel about that spreadsheet," one user wrote, "when you take a foam ball to the temple." The problems began almost immediately. Projectiles went missing. Colleagues retaliated. HR departments issued vague memos about appropriate behavior and weapon-like accessories. In one case, a manager banned the cannons after someone launched a marshmallow into a ventilation duct, shutting down the HVAC for half a day. And yet the appeal was undeniable. There was something deeply satisfying about turning your inbox into a target. The cannon offered a brief illusion of control in a world ruled by unread emails and suspiciously long meetings. Eventually, corporate culture caught up, and the desktop cannon was replaced by less controversial desk toys, Newton's cradles, fidget cubes, and coffee mugs that screamed internally. But for a moment, it reigned supreme, a tiny weapon of workplace rebellion. Of course, rebellion wasn't new. It went back centuries. And long before cubicles, there was a different fear entirely, the fear of being buried alive. An anxiety so powerful, someone invented a coffin with a bell. 41. The reviving coffin, 1800s. In the 1800s, medicine was equal parts science, guesswork, and unintentional trauma. Diagnosing death was a particularly tricky business, especially when someone was just in a coma or had a faint pulse, or looked a little too quiet for comfort. Out of this existential uncertainty came the reviving coffin, also known as the safety coffin. Its purpose? To make sure the dead were really dead, and if not, to give them a way back. The design varied, but the core concept remained the same. A coffin equipped with a signaling mechanism, usually a string attached to the buried person's hand. If the deceased woke up underground, they could tug the string, which rang a bell above the grave. Hence the phrase, "saved by the bell." Though that origin story is debated, it captured the public's imagination all the same. Some models even included air tubes, feeding lines, and glass viewing windows for grave attendants. Families were instructed to keep watch for a period after burial, listening for the faint jingle of post-mortem distress. Instructions ranged from practical to downright paranoid. One version came with a manual titled, "How to Resurrect Yourself Without Causing a Scene." Probably not its actual name, but close in spirit. Of course, false alarms occurred. A breeze could jostle the bell. Soil settling could cause movement. Gravediggers were reportedly haunted by random chimes in the night, only to discover nothing but very committed corpses. Some cemeteries had waiting mortuaries, where bodies were kept on display for days before burial, just to be sure. Despite the theatrics, the safety coffin tapped into a very real fear. In a world without reliable diagnostics, Death felt suspiciously casual. The reviving coffin offered a kind of psychological insurance, a morbid seatbelt for the afterlife. Eventually, advances in medicine rendered the device obsolete. But the instinct behind it? That stayed. Which leads us to another invention based on the illusion of control, a cleaning solution that didn't clean. It walked, on tiny paws, and hated every second of it. 42. The cat mopping system. 1970s. In the 1970s, that glorious age when everything from pet rocks to mood rings was considered innovation, someone had a very specific thought. My cat hates me. Let's make it do chores. Thus emerged the cat mopping system, a device so baffling in concept that it nearly transcended failure and achieved a kind of anti-genius. The system involved tiny, strap-on sponge booties designed to fit over a cat's paws. The idea was simple. As your cat roamed your house in its normal, aloof, possibly vengeful manner, it would simultaneously scrub your floors. A living, purring Swiffer. Advertisements called it passive cleaning with a touch of feline charm. What they didn't mention was the howling. First, cats don't like wearing things. They especially don't like wearing wet things on their feet. The process of applying the sponge shoes ranged from difficult to apocalyptic, depending on the cat. Most owners didn't make it past the first paw before receiving a very clear rejection. Sometimes in the form of scratches, sometimes in the form of a stare so withering it could curdle milk. Even if you did manage to get all 4 sponges attached, your cat's next move was usually to freeze, flail, or walk backwards into a wall. The idea that it would calmly pace the house, quietly polishing hardwood as it went, was pure fantasy. More often, the sponges flew off mid-sprint, soaked furniture, or were ceremoniously deposited in the litter box out of spite. Despite the obvious design flaws, the cat mopping system sold moderately well as a novelty gift, the kind you buy for someone you only think you like. It also served as a cautionary tale in product design. Just because something is technically possible doesn't mean it's emotionally advisable. And if strapping sponges to your cat wasn't surreal enough, the next idea took personal entertainment to new levels of isolation. All you needed was a hat. And a television. 43. The TV hat, 1990s. In the 1990s, a time when technology was bulky, optimism was high, and personal space was considered optional, someone invented the TV hat. Its premise was simple and spectacularly strange. Attach a small television screen inside a wide-brimmed hat, then stretch a dark fabric shroud over your face so you could watch your favorite shows in total visual isolation, like a mobile theater, or a privacy cone of shame. The hat looked like a cross between a beekeeper's veil and a homemade VR headset. The television, usually a battery-powered screen the size of a cassette case, was suspended in front of the eyes, nestled inside the fabric tunnel. You strapped it on, pulled the screen into position, and suddenly you were alone with Baywatch and your choices. Marketers pitched it as the future of personal entertainment. Watch anywhere, they said, without distractions. What they didn't say was that it blocked your peripheral vision, overheated your face, and made you look like you were preparing to weld something rather than watch The Price is Right. Public use was ill-advised. People bumped into furniture. One man reportedly wore it on a treadmill and walked straight into a wall. Another tried it during a flight and got asked to remove it by 2 separate flight attendants and one child who found it scary. There was also the matter of social perception. Wearing a TV hat in public sent a very specific message. I'm aggressively not interested in interacting with anyone, ever. Even introverts found it a bit much. The user experience combined visual immersion with physical discomfort and the occasional stiff neck. The TV hat did not last. Portable DVD players, smartphones, and eventually actual VR headsets all replaced it with sleeker, smarter tech. But it holds a special place in the Museum of Isolationist Gadgets, where the only thing more absurd than watching TV through a hat is taking your fish for a walk. 44. The Fishwalker, 2004. In 2004, someone stood before a home aquarium, gazed into the dead-eyed stare of their pet goldfish, and thought, "You deserve the outside world." Thus the fish walker was born. A stroller-like contraption designed to let you walk your fish. Yes, outside, like a dog. Except it was full of water and trauma. The fish walker looked like a futuristic baby carriage merged with a portable fish tank. It had wheels, a clear water-filled chamber, and, in high-end models, temperature control and filtration systems. The idea was to give fish a change of scenery and their human companions a new kind of pet bonding experience. "Take your fish for a stroll," the marketing declared, "and enjoy the world together." It was not a good idea. First, fish don't care about scenery. They're not wired for sightseeing. Second, the jostling motion of the walker turned even a smooth sidewalk into an aquatic earthquake. Water sloshed. Fish panicked. One customer review simply read, "My fish did not enjoy this. Neither did I." Then there were the reactions from people who saw it in action. Confusion, laughter. One person reportedly mistook it for a mobile smoothie blender. Children pointed. Dogs barked. And in at least one case, a stranger asked, with genuine concern, "Is that legal?" Fishwalkers faced practical issues too. They were hard to clean, prone to leaks, and on sunny days the clear tanks turned into little mobile greenhouses. The water heated quickly. The fish looked less like happy passengers and more like they were surviving a climate crisis. The product didn't last long. A few were sold, fewer were used more than once. But it proved yet again that the human desire to involve pets in human rituals knows no bounds. And if you thought fish didn't appreciate hats, wait until you meet the next invention, a hat made for birds. Or rather, a hat made for you to attract birds directly to your head. 45. The Bird Feeder Hat, 1955. In 1955, one visionary, or possibly one very bored birdwatcher, unveiled the bird feeder hat, a headpiece designed to turn your skull into a snack bar for sparrows. It was a standard sun hat with a plastic tray mounted on top, filled with birdseed and the wild hope that nature would find you approachable. The concept was undeniably whimsical. Sit in your backyard, pour some seed into your hat, and become one with the ecosystem. Photos from the time show cheerful men and women in lawn chairs, gazing upward as finches nibbled delicately from their heads. It was marketed as relaxing, meditative, and an ideal way to connect with wildlife. But theory rarely survives contact with birds. For starters, birds are not known for their dining etiquette. They flapped. They squawked. They occasionally mistook the wearer's ears for additional perches. The tray design had no guardrails, so any sudden head movement sent seeds flying. And where birds gather, droppings follow. Users discovered, quickly and messily, that there was no dignified way to remove a pigeon from your scalp. Still, the bird feeder hat found its niche. It was sold at nature centers, novelty shops, and eccentric gift boutiques. Bird enthusiasts wore it during long, still afternoons, hoping for a chickadee cameo. Children loved it, for about 5 minutes, until the first crow arrived. Predictably, the hat fell out of favor. Not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. One woman claimed she couldn't go into her own garden without becoming a walking aviary. Another recounted a squirrel launching itself from a nearby tree to reach the snack tray, leaving behind a broken hat, a startled woman, and a very pleased squirrel. The bird feeder hat faded into obscurity, but not before proving a timeless truth. If you invite nature into your personal space, nature will RSVP, with claws. And if geometry was more your style than biology, the next invention offered a new kind of domestic nightmare, cube-shaped everything. 46. The Cube Room, 1970s. The 1970s were a time of bold design choices, strange upholstery, and the belief that everything could, and probably should, be reimagined. So it was perhaps inevitable that someone took a long look at traditional rooms and decided that all those rounded edges and soft contours were simply too organic. Thus, the cube room was born, a design fad that replaced every architectural and furniture element with aggressive right angles. At its core, the cube room concept was about embracing the future. Sharp lines, stark symmetry, and monochrome palettes gave homes a vaguely sci-fi aesthetic, as if you were living inside a Rubik's Cube made entirely of concrete and mood lighting. Designers swapped out beds for cube-shaped sleeping pods, coffee tables for perfect glass boxes, and chairs that looked more like pixelated punishment. On paper, it was minimalist, clean, futuristic. In reality, it was a padded room without the padding. You couldn't lean comfortably on anything. Every surface was either too hard, too sharp, or too geometrically committed to accommodate actual human behavior. Walking barefoot became a game of nerve and navigation. Sitting down required careful planning and well-developed knees. The walls were often modular, movable cubes that could be rearranged for spatial fluidity, though most people just ended up creating unusable layouts and forgetting where the bathroom was. Ceiling lighting came in gridded panels. Even plants were forced into square pots and trimmed into tidy boxes, as if round leaves would violate the aesthetic code. It didn't help that cube furniture was heavy, unyielding, and difficult to move. Many owners gave up and simply worked around the decor, choosing function over fashion. Others stuck with it, insisting it was a statement. It was. The statement was, "I'm willing to sacrifice my shins for visual cohesion." The cube room fad eventually faded, replaced by softer, more forgiving trends. But its legacy lingers. In modernist museums, ironic Instagram photos, and the occasional Airbnb that still thinks rectangles are a lifestyle. And while the cube room boxed people in physically, the next invention took a different approach, creating a mobile, inflatable bubble designed to keep people out. 47. The personal space bubble, 1950. In 1950, as post-war optimism mingled with the growing fear of crowding, germs, and unsolicited interaction, someone introduced a solution that was both brilliantly literal and completely impractical: the personal space bubble. Worn around the torso like an inflatable life ring, this invention promised to keep strangers and social obligations at a safe, cushiony distance. The bubble was made of transparent plastic, inflated manually via a valve, and expanded outward to form a soft, translucent barrier about 3 feet in diameter. The idea was that by wearing it in public, on buses, in stores, or at the beach, you could enforce a gentle, do not disturb radius around your personal space. It was marketed as hygienic, stress-reducing, and ideal for those who value privacy. Which sounds lovely until you try walking through a door, or sitting down, or passing anyone in a hallway. Early users reported getting stuck in subway turnstiles, knocking over display shelves, and bouncing off fellow bubble wearers like awkward bumper cars. There was also the small issue of popping. The bubble was inflatable, yes, but it was not resilient. Any sharp edge, passing dog claw, or rebellious umbrella could reduce your carefully curated solitude to a deflating embarrassment. One user reported being trapped in a revolving door for 15 minutes while slowly leaking air, dignity, and goodwill. Children found it hilarious. Adults found it exhausting. And society at large quickly decided that if you needed an inflatable force field to exist in public, maybe you needed a different kind of support system. Still, the personal space bubble endures as a cultural metaphor, a symbol of the human desire to retreat, to shield, to define where you ends and they begin. A bubble might not be practical, but it sure is relatable. And if you thought physical bubbles were odd, just wait until the digital age brought us gloves designed to turn your finger into a stylus. Because apparently, even in the 2000s, Touching your screen with your skin was a bridge too far. 48. The phone finger, 2008. In 2008, the world was adjusting to smartphones, grappling with touchscreens, and collectively panicking about smudges. Into this anxious haze stepped the phone finger, a stretchy glove with a stylus tip attached to the index finger, marketed as the ultimate solution to keep your screen pristine while still operating your device. Because nothing says, "I'm ready for the future," like wearing a fingertip condom for your phone. The glove was made of soft fabric, often black, with a reinforced, rubberized stylus pad stitched to the end. It allowed users to tap, swipe, and scroll without leaving fingerprints. Which sounds reasonable, until you saw someone actually wearing it in public, jabbing at their screen like a suspicious cyborg with commitment issues. The main appeal was cleanliness. No more oily streaks. No more touch errors from long nails or clumsy thumbs. Just precise, smudge-free interaction. Unfortunately, this came at the cost of style, convenience, and general social acceptance. Putting on a dedicated glove just to check your email made the already awkward act of early smartphone use even more performative. There were also practical issues. The glove was often too tight or too loose. The stylus tip wore out quickly. And if you tried using it on a multi-touch screen, say to Zoom, it only worked half the time, leaving you pinching the air like a confused magician. Yet, for a brief window of time, it caught on, especially among germaphobes, tech obsessives, and early adopters who wanted to avoid being seen cleaning their screens with their sleeves. Some companies even gave them out as promotional items, complete with branded logos and matching microfiber cloths. But as touchscreen technology improved and people got over the horror of a little grease, the phone finger quickly became obsolete, a relic of a moment when we weren't sure how to touch the future without leaving a mark. And if the hand wasn't sacred, then nothing was. Which brings us to perhaps the strangest hybrid yet. Part walking aid, part playground. A pogo stick, built into a cane. 49. The Pogo Cane, 1931. In 1931, someone, perhaps after watching a vaudeville act or after one too many cups of Depression-era optimism, invented the Pogo Cane. It was exactly what it sounds like, a walking cane that doubled as a pogo stick, for the elderly, or for anyone who wanted to combine balance assistance with the very real risk of orbital launch. The premise was cheerfully absurd. Why walk when you can bounce? The cane had a spring-loaded bottom and a reinforced shaft meant to absorb impact and redirect it into vertical motion. Supposedly, this would reduce joint pressure and reinvigorate mobility. In practice, it turned every step into a high-stakes physics experiment. Initial marketing pitched it as fun, youthful, and dynamic, which is a brave way of saying you might be airborne soon. The spring mechanism was unpredictable, too soft to give a real bounce, too stiff to offer smooth motion. Users either hovered slightly like confused goats, or were jolted upward, losing their grip entirely. Imagine a dignified senior suddenly launched 2 feet into the air outside a post office. Now imagine that happening often enough that city councils had to issue warnings. Balance was the next problem. A pogo stick requires core strength, timing, and a good sense of spatial awareness, all of which this cane's target audience was specifically not relying on. Lawsuits followed. Injuries were documented. One test group was politely described as emotionally shaken, and yet some insisted it had therapeutic potential. "You just need to learn the rhythm," one enthusiast claimed, shortly before colliding with a mailbox. Despite noble efforts, the pogo cane didn't last long. Most were retired to garages, coat racks, or pawn shops that specialized in regret. But it left behind a legacy, not of mobility, but of ambition. The belief that even a tool of stability could be transformed into something ridiculous, risky, and unforgettable. And with that, our parade of ill-fated American inventions comes to a bouncing, clattering end, where spring-loaded dreams meet the hard pavement of reality, and innovation finally, mercifully, takes a seat.